In this episode, we're going to build a clear picture of what it means to encrypt cardholder data in transit end-to-end, because that phrase can sound like a simple switch you flip when it is really a set of decisions you have to get right together. Data in transit is any time information is moving from one place to another, like from a payment page to a server, from a server to a database, or from one internal system to another across a network. New learners often assume the danger is only on the public internet, but data can be intercepted anywhere there is a pathway, including inside a company's own environment. End-to-end encryption is about protecting the data for the entire journey, not just a small portion that makes you feel better. When you learn to think about the full journey, you stop asking whether encryption exists somewhere, and you start asking whether there is any segment of the path where the data is exposed, even briefly. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to start is to separate the idea of transit from storage, because the risks and protections are different even though the data is the same. When data is stored, the main concern is that someone might access or copy it from a system at rest. When data is in transit, the concern is that someone might observe it while it moves, either by passively listening or by actively interfering. The internet and internal networks are full of devices that can see traffic, such as routers, switches, wireless access points, and security tools, and each one is a potential observation point. That does not mean those devices are malicious, but it means there are many places where a mistake or compromise could reveal traffic. End-to-end thinking assumes you do not control every observation point perfectly, so you rely on cryptography to keep the content unreadable. This is why encryption in transit is not an optional luxury in a card data environment, but a basic expectation. Now it helps to clarify what encryption in transit is supposed to accomplish, because people sometimes treat it as a synonym for secure communication. Encryption in transit is mainly about confidentiality, meaning someone who intercepts the traffic should not be able to read the cardholder data. It also often supports integrity, meaning the receiver can detect if the message was altered while moving. And it supports authenticity, meaning the parties can have confidence they are talking to the correct endpoint and not an imposter. Those three outcomes work together, and when any one of them is missing, the whole picture becomes shakier. Beginners sometimes focus only on hiding the text and forget that a man in the middle can trick two sides into talking through an attacker if identity is not properly verified. So end-to-end does not just mean the bits are scrambled. It means the journey is protected against eavesdropping and tampering while making sure the data is going where you think it is going. A classic misconception is that encryption only matters when traffic leaves the building or when it crosses the public internet. In reality, internal networks can be messy, shared, and not as trusted as people assume. Organizations often have legacy segments, flat network designs, or third-party managed devices that increase the number of people and systems with potential access. Even if you trust your own employees, you still have to plan for compromised endpoints, misconfigurations, and the simple fact that internal traffic can be captured for troubleshooting. When cardholder data moves in clear text inside an internal network, it becomes visible to more systems and more people than intended, and it often gets stored unintentionally in places like packet captures and monitoring logs. End-to-end encryption eliminates that broad visibility because the payload stays protected across every hop. The goal is to prevent a situation where an attacker does not need to break into the destination system at all because they can just watch the data moving. To make end-to-end feel real, imagine the data path as a chain of segments with handoffs in between. A customer enters payment information into a web page. That data moves to a web server, then perhaps to an application service, then to a payment processor, and maybe to a database or logging system, depending on design. Each handoff is a moment where data could be exposed if one segment is protected and the next segment is not. People sometimes encrypt the customer's connection to the website, but then move the same sensitive fields across internal services without encryption because it seems safer inside. That creates a weak middle where the data is exposed after it arrives. End-to-end means you examine every hop and ensure there is no gap where the data is readable while traveling. If you can point to any segment where the data travels unprotected, you do not have end-to-end protection, even if part of the journey is encrypted. Another important concept is that encryption in transit is not only about choosing a protocol, but about selecting and managing strong cryptography settings. Weak algorithms, weak configurations, and outdated protocol versions can reduce encryption to something that looks secure but is easier to break or bypass. For beginners, you do not need to memorize specific cipher names to understand the principle. You want encryption that is considered strong by current standards, and you want to avoid older or deprecated options that attackers can exploit. You also want to avoid configurations that allow downgrade behavior, where a connection falls back to weaker settings when something goes wrong. End-to-end encryption should be a deliberate security posture, not a best-effort negotiation that sometimes works and sometimes gives up. When you assess environments, you look for the difference between encrypted by default and encrypted when convenient. Identity verification is one of the most overlooked parts of in-transit protection, and it is central to why end-to-end matters. If a system encrypts traffic but does not strongly verify who it is talking to, an attacker can insert themselves as a fake endpoint and still see the content. This can happen through misissued certificates, poor validation behavior, or trust settings that accept anything that looks close enough. Beginners are often surprised to learn that some systems can be configured to skip validation for convenience during testing, and then that habit leaks into production. End-to-end encryption requires that both sides validate each other appropriately based on the risk and the design, especially when sensitive data is involved. The reason is simple. Encryption without trustworthy identity is like sealing a letter in an envelope and handing it to the wrong courier. You protected it from casual reading, but not from deliberate interception. It also helps to think about where encryption begins and ends in a practical architecture, because that is where end-to-end can silently fail. Sometimes encryption is terminated early by an intermediary, like a load balancer or a reverse proxy, which decrypts incoming traffic and then sends it onward. That can still be secure if the onward segment is also encrypted and the intermediary is tightly controlled, but it creates a point where the data is briefly in clear text. If that intermediary is compromised, or if the internal segment is not encrypted, the protection is incomplete. End-to-end thinking forces you to ask what systems decrypt the data and whether that decryption is necessary. The fewer decryption points you have, the fewer places exist where the data can be exposed. When decryption points are necessary, you want them to be controlled, monitored, and justified. Key management is part of the story even for transit encryption, because the keys and certificates used to establish secure sessions must be protected and maintained. If private keys are copied broadly, stored insecurely, or left on systems with too many administrators, then an attacker can impersonate a service or decrypt captured traffic in some scenarios. Beginners often imagine that the encryption happens automatically without secrets anyone needs to worry about, but the foundation is still keys that have to be created, stored, rotated, and retired. Expired certificates, mismatched configurations, and long-forgotten test certificates are all common causes of broken encryption posture. End-to-end encryption requires operational discipline, so the secure path does not silently degrade over time. In other words, the cryptography is not just a technical feature. It is also a maintenance commitment. You should also connect in-transit encryption to segmentation and scope, because encryption influences how far cardholder data can travel safely. If sensitive data must cross a network boundary, encryption can reduce exposure, but it does not automatically remove the need for other controls. Some people mistakenly believe that if data is encrypted, then any network can carry it without concern, but that ignores the possibility of endpoint compromise, credential theft, and misconfiguration. Encryption protects the content while it is moving, but it does not prevent an attacker from abusing legitimate access at the destination. End-to-end encryption should be paired with access controls, monitoring, and careful design so that only systems that truly need the data can receive it. Thinking this way keeps you from treating encryption as a permission slip to spread sensitive flows across the environment. A practical teaching beat is to recognize common places where teams accidentally send cardholder data in ways they did not intend. For example, Some applications pass sensitive fields between microservices more broadly than necessary because the design is built around shipping full records everywhere. Some systems generate notifications or error messages that include full values and then transmit those messages to monitoring or ticketing systems. Some teams export data for reconciliation and then transfer files between systems in ways that are not consistently protected. End-to-end encryption reduces the risk of these transit paths becoming exposures, but it also encourages you to design data flows to avoid moving sensitive values unnecessarily. The deeper mindset is to keep sensitive data on short, well-defined paths, and to protect those paths consistently so there is no accidental cleartext segment. When you train yourself to look for unexpected transit paths, you start seeing hidden risk where others see routine operations. Evidence and verification are the final layer that turns an idea into something you can trust with zero surprises. It is easy for an organization to say that traffic is encrypted, but a QSA mindset looks for proof that the entire path is protected as claimed. Proof can involve documentation of flows, configuration evidence showing strong settings, and records that demonstrate how certificates are managed. It can also involve confirming that internal service-to-service connections are protected, not just customer-facing connections. The point is not to be skeptical for sport, but to eliminate ambiguity, because ambiguity is where breaches hide. End-to-end encryption is not a slogan. It is an observable property of a well-designed environment. As you wrap all of this into one mental model, encrypting cardholder data in transit end-to-end becomes a story about protecting the whole journey, not just the parts that are easiest to see. You define what counts as transit, you map the full path, and you ensure there is no clear text segment between start and finish. You insist on strong cryptography and strong identity validation so encryption cannot be tricked or downgraded. You pay attention to where decryption happens and minimize it, because every decryption point is a place where exposure can occur. You maintain the keys and certificates that make secure sessions possible, because neglected secrets turn good design into fragile reality. When you hold all those pieces together, you can say end-to-end with confidence, because you are not trusting hope or habit. You are trusting a design you can verify.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.